Okay, we're online. I don't know if anybody else is online. I know Goran is online from beautiful downtown Madrid. Is there anybody else around? Okay, we have a few viewers online. Great. We've just turned 1 o'clock, so I will wait a minute or so and then we'll start today's webinars. Hello to, I think, Madrid, Leeds, Brussels. Jana is here. Fantastic. So I think we're just about all here. We've got 6 viewers. I think that's it. I think that's the entire. Let me just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Right. I'm not sure if with everybody is here. If you are online and haven't sent a chat message, please try and do so. The chat button is in. Pardon me. The top of your screen on the right or the left hand side. I can never remember which. It's different on mine. So please do send me a chat if you can. And I'll start in a moment once I feel confident that everybody is actually online. So as I said, please do send me a chat message. Just 1 second. Sorry, I just need to do something. What do you need now? To start. So sorry about that. Okay. Right. Well, I'm hoping everybody is here online, can hear, can see. So I think we're going to go straight in because this is quite an intensive webinar about the Erasmus Plus program. So I'm going to go straight into the webinar presentation. I think almost everybody, I think there was one very late registration, but apart from that, everybody should have been sent the details this morning, the text of today's webinar. If for some reason you weren't sent that, I do apologize. Send me a text to let me know you haven't received it, and I'll make sure that you do receive it after the webinar is over. Okay. Just 1 second, small technical glitch. Oops. Whoops. Sorry, just. I hope everybody can see that slide. I'm not 100% convinced the slides are actually displaying. So I put the first slide up, and I've now put the second slide up, and I've put the third slide up. Could somebody send me a text message to tell me whether they can see the slides or whether they can't see the slides? It would just be helpful for me to know whether or not you are able to see the slides, if that was possible. If someone could send me a chat message, please. I just want to make double sure, because there seems to be a slight issue about seeing the slides. Did anybody see the slides? I'm sorry to ask you this, but there seemed to be a small glitch with the on the technical side. Could somebody just send me a chat to let me know whether or not they did see the slides at all? No slides. Aha! Okay. Right, I'm really sorry. This seems to be a small technical problem. I'm just going to have to look into that to see why we can't display the slides. Just give me 1 second to... Okay, with luck, you are now able to see the slides. I'm hoping that the slides are now visible to everybody. I'm just going to talk like this for about a minute to make sure that you have a chance to see. They should see the first slide and then the second slide about how to interact. I'm going to go back to the first slide, and then the second slide, and the first slide, and the second slide. It's about like an eye test, really. Okay, I'm now just going to go back and check to say, please, were you able to see the slides now? I do apologize for this slight hiccup. So please let me know if you were able to see the slides. Great. Okay, I'm really sorry about that. That was a slight technical glitch. Doesn't happen very often. It has happened once before. So we're now back to the slides, and I'm going to keep going. Okay. Erasmus Plus program. You know all about the interacting. Send a chat message. I will go back and check every so often to see if anybody has sent a chat message. Background of the European Union. You've all heard this before. I'm not going to go through this in detail. The treaty and the mission statement. This is what the treaty says about culture. We've done all that before. This is the European Union themes for the next 10 years, or the 10 years till 2020, as encapsulated within Europe 2020 agenda. Obviously, the second last one you'll see is education, skills, and lifelong learning. This is a crucial theme of the European Union. Therefore, this means that the Erasmus Plus program does have at least a reasonable budget to spend in this particular area. It's obviously a priority. The Erasmus Plus program is one of the transnational funds, so working with other countries is essential in one way or another. Okay, transnational funds, these are the ones we're looking at. You'll see the Erasmus Plus budget is around 15 billion euros. So it's not the biggest. That, of course, is the Horizon 2020 program, but it's certainly one of the larger transnational funds. So do be aware of that. And as I've said all along, transnational funds can be either or both project grants involving partner organizations from different countries, or they can be mobility grants. And the interesting thing about Erasmus Plus is it's a perfect example because it does both. You can get project grants, or you can get grants for mobility activities. So there are essentially two strands. Both those strands are within the Erasmus Plus program. There are links to Europe 2020 I've already explained, and match funding does apply for projects as well, but perhaps on a slightly more straightforward basis than it does for some of the other programs that we've looked at. Okay, Erasmus Plus. Now, This webinar could go on forever, mainly to do with the fact that there are so many strands, and there is a lot of detail about the criteria and so on for every single one of those strands. The important thing to remember, however, is that at the end of the day, the Erasmus Plus program, no matter how many sub-strands there might be, is really quite simple. It covers education and training, so schools, vocational training, higher education, adult education, lifelong learning, covers all those areas of education and training, and it covers young people, so young people aged 13 to 30, and the people who work with young people, so youth workers as well. And it also covers certain areas of sport. What has actually happened is that some of you may be aware that there was a previous program called Lifelong Learning, which was the program for education and training, and there was a previous program called Youth in Action, which was for young people. And those programs have been brought together under the heading of Erasmus Plus. Erasmus Plus, once upon a time, was the name given to the higher education strand of lifelong learning. And what's happened is they've taken that name and they've given that name to the entire program. Okay, so that's what it covers. The way it works, as I've said before, is essentially there is a major strand for mobility and there is another major strand for projects. They are called strategic partnerships. Okay, so mobility grants are given and project grants are given, called strategic partnerships. Budget of 15 billion, and it includes centralized and decentralized delivery. Now, decentralized delivery is absolutely crucial here. Decentralized delivery means that unlike the culture program or the Europe for Citizens program, which many of you have sat in on, for those programs, wherever you are in Europe, you send your application off to Brussels, to the European Commission. You do not do that with the Erasmus Plus program. For these mobility and project grants, you submit your application to the agency, the contact point within your member state. So in the UK, we would submit it to the agency here in the UK. If you're in Spain, you'd submit it to the agency in Spain, and so on. Okay, so this is not about applying to Brussels, this is about applying to an agency on the centralized basis. And that means it's much simpler to access this funding and much quicker. So there is a huge advantage to this program being a decentralized program. It's the easiest funding to access. Small point there about the fact that you have to be an organization to apply for this funding. You cannot be an individual, even though they give small mobility grants for individuals to undertake a mobility. The application has to come from an organization. So just do be aware of that only organization based. And the other thing, actually, before I go off this, is that there is a sort of third strand, which is the strand which enables you to create projects out of mobility grants. You know, the simple analysis or the difference between mobility grants and project grants is that you apply for an individual mobility grant as an individual to go on a trip, to go on a visit or an exchange or whatever. And the alternative is to run a project where you put together a large-scale application, the detailed budget, and so on and so forth, and you apply for a project grant. But you can create projects by applying for a batch of mobility grants. So you can get a project together by putting in for 20 mobility grants, or 30 or 40 or 50. So you can create a project in that way. I mean, we ourselves, Euclid, we did this a few years ago when we applied to run a cultural fundraising program across a number of member states. The idea being that each participant would run a weekend workshop with experts in, pardon me, experts in cultural fundraising, running a training program, and that the partners would send people from each partner country to all the other workshops run in the other countries. So each partner, rather than make this one overall project, we made this that each partner would apply in their country for, I think we applied for 15 mobility grants. Each partner applied for 15 mobility grants, which was to send 5 people to the other 3 workshops. And there was quite a lot of flexibility about how the money was spent. So essentially what we ended up doing was, apart from covering the costs of the travel and the accommodation and subsistence and so on from these mobility grants, they also allowed us to pay for the costs of running the workshop. And mobility grants are quite straightforward because there is a great deal less financial reporting back required. So this was a very interesting way of approaching the opportunity to develop a project by applying for a series of mobility grants. So although there are mobility grants and project grants, there is also a way in which you might merge these ideas and apply for mobility grants to run a project. I hope that's reasonably clear. I'm just going to very briefly go back and check to make sure that everybody is okay and that we are all seeing the slides and everything is running relatively smoothly. Yes, I think it is all going okay now. That's great. Nobody is saying they can't see anything. Okay, so back to the slides. General objectives. Okay, now I'm not going to keep reading out all of these because a lot of this talks about, obviously, these are education and training programs. So a lot of this relates back to, I mean, here you'll see the first one talks about Europe 2020 strategy. It refers to the framework for cooperation and training. It refers to the development of the countries in higher education, the framework for cooperation in youth, the European dimension in sport, promotion of European values. Okay, broad general objectives. Okay. Important features. Dissemination and exploitation of project results. They're very, very, very key that this program is seen as being, at least in part, a pilot type program where you would undertake activities on the basis of what comes out of these activities are activities or ways of working or ways of teaching or ways of training that are then able to be replicated in other countries. They're very, very keen that these projects are seen as templates that can be used by others. Which leads on to the next point, which is the open access. They want to make sure that whatever you create as a result of this, in terms of, educational materials and tools and documents and so on and so forth, that's available to be used by anybody. There is an international dimension. In other words, they do want you to work in cooperation with other countries. That's absolutely quite straightforward. And equity and inclusion, they want to make sure that this promotes equity. I think they use equity where they mean equality, but anyway. Access to learners from disadvantaged backgrounds and those with fewer opportunities. So those are 4 quite important features. Another important feature is multilingualism. They do want to make sure that the Erasmus program is used to address the challenges of multilingualism across Europe, where there are a series of official languages, but it's quite clear that there are some languages which are more dominant. English, of course, being the one that is most dominant. So they're very keen to sort of do that. But not every project needs to address the issue of multilingualism, sorry. It's one of those issues. Structure of the program. Well, as I keep saying, there are at least 2 key actions. So the first key action, mobility of individuals. Now, there are 2 other strands to this mobility, but the ones in italics on this page, I'm not going to speak about them at all. They're the ones where you have to apply to Brussels. I don't think they're relevant to the people who are attending this webinar, so I'm not going to talk about them. Mobility of learners and staff, opportunities for students, trainees, young people, volunteers, professors, teachers, trainers, youth workers, and so on and so forth, to undertake learning, professional experience in another country. Do bear in mind that it does say educational institutions and civil society organizations. Civil society organizations is a wide catch-all that certainly includes arts and cultural organizations. Key action 2, transnational strategic partnerships aim to develop initiatives addressing one or more fields of education, training and youth, promoting innovation, exchange of experience and know-how between different types of organizations involved in education, training and youth. Okay, so that's the partnership program. Again, there's all those in italics where you apply directly to Brussels, and I'm not going to be talking about those today. There are other actions, key action 3, which provides support for policy reform. So that's a sort of research and dissemination and knowledge building strand. And there's the Jean Monnet activities, which is about EU-related research and activities within the higher education sector. So again, we're not going to talk about any of that, but just so you know that it exists. For sport, just to be clear what they mean by sport, so collaborative partnerships aimed at combating doping at grassroots sports level is very important, as well as other areas such as fighting against match fixing and innovative approaches to contain violence and tackle racism and intolerance. Something needs to be done about the Chelsea supporters in this vein from the last 24 hours or so. It supports not-for-profit European sports events, evidence-based policy making, and so on. So there's a range of different strands within the sports. Okay, who can take part? Right, participants, individuals, students, trainees, apprentices, pupils, so anybody, sort of all sorts of people, providing they are active in the field of education, training, and youth. So either they are a student or a trainee, or they're a young person. However, these participants will be reached through organisations, institutions, bodies, and so on who organise. So they have this double definition of participants, the individuals, and participating organisations, who are the ones who are applying. Okay, the conditions depend on the country in which they are based, whether they're a member state or outside the member states, and so on. We'll come to that in a moment. In fact, we come to it now. Participants must be established in a program country. There are some partner countries. The partner countries, these could be people outside of Europe. There are slightly different rules for the different strands, so you need to look at those a little bit carefully, but it's nothing complicated about that. But in terms of where you would probably be likely to thinking of developing partnership projects, all the European countries and the countries applying to be EU members and so on, they are all likely to be eligible to participate. Okay. Participating organisations, they're beneficiaries of the grants. They sign a grant agreement. They must be established in a program country. They can be any organisation active in the fields of education, training, youth, or sport. And many actions are open to the participation of other players in the labour markets, which will include, as we will see in a moment, cultural organisations as well. Eligible countries, member states of the European Union, plus the non-EU programme countries, so not member states, but countries trying to be member states or they're members of the economic area, such as Norway and Iceland. Switzerland is also able to participate in most of the Erasmus Plus strands as well. So that's the sort of list of programme countries. Certain actions includes the countries that are listed on this slide that are on your sheet: Eastern Partnership countries, some of the Mediterranean countries, other Western Balkans countries, and maybe even the Russian Federation. Not quite sure for how much longer, but they're certainly eligible at the moment. You need to look at the program guide, the latest program guide. They changed it this year, so do bear in mind you need to look at the latest program guide just to double check who is going to be eligible for which part of the program you're interested in. Objectives and priorities. So the overall objectives: improving key competences and skills, fostering quality improvements, innovation, excellence, and internationalization, enhancing the international dimension of education and training, and improving the teaching and learning of languages. The first one, level of key competences and skills, is incredibly broad. As are the others to a certain degree, but certainly the first one is particularly broad. The priorities that they have: developing basic and transversal skills, entrepreneurship, digital skills, multilingualism, and so on. So in many ways, some cultural organizations have participated in this program because they have used creative mechanisms, creative ideas in order to run educational training programs in these sorts of areas. That's one way in which cultural organizations have been involved. Enhancing ICT uptake, so using the digital technologies in order to help people learn or develop more. Promoting coherence between different transparency and recognition tools. I wouldn't worry too much about that one. That's not going to be relevant to most projects that I think cultural sector organizations might come up with. There are also additional priorities depending on which strand you're going for. So there are different priorities for different strands. In adult education, they are particularly interested in projects contributing to reduction in the number of low-skilled adults. So ways in which you can involve young, and not just young people, any sort of adult who may have gaps in their skills or their capacity or whatever. If there's a way in which your project is going to contribute to addressing that, then this might be useful. The reason I picked on adult education is that outside the youth strand, it seems to be the most obvious or the most likely strand that arts and cultural organizations are going to be eligible for is adult education, because that covers a multitude of ages, activities, community and outreach work. All those sorts of things all fall under the adult education umbrella. Whereas higher education and vocational education, they're expecting the more traditional, universities and colleges and so on to be the applicants. But in terms of adult education, it can be a much broader range of potential applicants. The youth strand, so I've looked at the education and training strand. In terms of the youth strand, improving the level of key competences and skills, but also promoting participation in democratic life in Europe, as well as in the labour market, citizenship, intercultural dialogue, social inclusion, solidarity, and so on. Quality improvements in youth work, that may be relevant. There's also a policy reform strand, but I don't think that's going to be relevant. Enhancing international dimension of youth activities and the roles of youth workers and organisations as support structures for young people in complementarity with the EU's external actions. So that sort of might involve countries in other parts of the world. So that's an opportunity to do projects involving partners in other parts of the world, as well as some European partners. The priorities here for young people include promoting social inclusion and well-being, promoting healthy behaviours, awareness about citizenship, developing basic skills, enhancing ICT uptake. I think that the programs here for young people, and do bear in mind that young people covers the age range of 13 to 30, are extremely broad and very, very diverse. Program budget, so nearly 15 million euros. I think we said 15 at the beginning, but it actually went down a little bit. So by the time I got around to writing that, I've changed this, but forgot to change the bit at the beginning. So around 15 billion euros. Most of it's going on the education and training, 10% going on the youth, and the rest goes on the management and so on. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about key action 1, which is mobility. So learning mobility. Learning mobility individuals, positive and long-lasting effects on the participants and participating organizations. There's a whole list of outcomes that they're interested in. I'm not going to go through all those. You can choose for yourselves which ones might be relevant, but those are the sorts of outcomes they are looking for. So improved competencies, forget the broader understanding, capacity to trigger changes, interconnections between formal and non-formal education, better quality of work, understanding and responsive to social, linguistic, and cultural diversity, meeting the needs of the disadvantaged, and so on and so forth. So these should be, these are some of the options for the outcomes for the participants in the particular program. There are also outcomes for participating organizations, helping their capacity to operate at the international level, involving other countries, innovative and different ways of operating towards their target groups, and more dynamic, committed and professional environments. So the aims of the Mobility Project are stated here: supporting learners in the acquisition of competences, professional development of those working, foreign languages, awareness and understanding of other cultures and countries, that could be particularly relevant to arts and cultural organisations, capacities, attractiveness and international dimensions, reinforcing synergies and transitions, and ensuring a better recognition of competences gained through learning periods abroad. Okay. The stages of a mobility project is fairly straightforward, but just that they do make this clear. There is the preparation stage, so sorting it all out, setting up the agreements and everything else. The implementation stage, when it all happens, and the follow-up stage, which is the evaluation, the formal recognition if that's appropriate, and so on. Now, I think they make this point because they are really keen to make sure these projects are well prepared and that there is plenty of time and resources put into the follow-up, the evaluation, and so on and so forth. Those are all really very important. Other key issues. So they're particularly looking for partner organizations with different backgrounds and active in different fields of socioeconomic sectors. So this is making the point that they don't want to stick to traditional education and training organizations or youth organizations. They're interested in a variety of different types of organizations. And also, they say that there's a possibility of organizing mobility activities within a broader strategic framework. So, your grant application could cover a period of up to 2 years, but you may undertake several mobility activities over that particular period. Depending on the profile of participants involved, following types of mobility activities are supported. So there we go. Field of education and training, mobility projects for higher education students and staff, mobility projects for vocational education and training learners and staff, school staff, adult education. Again, I focus on adult education because I think that's the one that's most likely to be relevant. And for youth, you can do it for young people and youth workers. So all we're saying here is, although this is it's taken me a long time to say it, but essentially just reinforce the fact that key action 1, mobility, and within the mobility strand, your application falls into one of these categories depending on which area of education and training or young people that you are going to be focusing on. I'm going to give the example of adult education staff. It can comprise one or more of the following activities, so teaching, training assignments, teaching or providing training at a partner organization abroad, staff training, so providing training opportunities for the people who are working for that particular organization. The roles of the organization here, just to make it absolutely clear, that they sort of the applicant organization, whoever's applying, the sending organization, so whoever is sending people, and the receiving organization. Now, the applicant is likely to be as well either a sending or a receiving organization. So that's the way that works. The receiving organization may be a course provider, or it may be any other sort of partner in a relevant organization. The certain mobility of staff, that's the European Development Plan. I'll come back to the European Development Plan. Response to clearly identified staff development needs, so on. Essentially what this is saying is that there needs to be a framework. They're not going to sort of be interested in projects that simply come out of the blue. They want some evidence that these projects are part of a wider learning strategy or set of strategies which are designed to achieve a set of targets or goals in the medium to long term. So what this is implying is that you need to have this European Development Plan, and you have to submit your European Development Plan as part of your application. Don't be put off by that. The European Development Plan is remarkably straightforward in terms of just setting out a series of goals and targets for your European work, but there does need to be one that's prepared, written, and included in the application process. Eligibility. So this simply says what sort of participating organizations can be. I'm not going to read all of that out, but I've highlighted in red the fact that within the program guide, it does make it absolutely clear that you can be a cultural organization, a library, a museum, whatever. So cultural organizations can certainly apply within this. Who can apply? Range of organizations that can apply. Eligible activities, teaching, training, staff training. Number of participating organizations. You must have a minimum of 2. So in other words, 1 sending and 1 receiving. So you must have at least 2 partner organizations involved in this from different program countries. The projects can last for up to 2 years. I mean, I'm just going back to the previous thing. I think it's fair to say that they would expect most projects would have more than 2, but the minimum is only 2. Okay, projects can last for 1 to 2 years. The activities within the project can last for 2 days to 2 months, excluding the travel time. The venues, the activities must be carried out in another place, another program country. The participants can be the staff of the adult education organization. You apply within your member state to the national agency. The next deadline is the 4th of March 2015 for projects starting between June and December. And as far as we know, that is the only deadline in 2015. Okay. The award criteria. Now, if you've been to other webinars, I've been banging on about the fact how there is now a commonality of award criteria. The first award criteria is always about the relevance of the project. So how relevant is your project idea to the objectives and priorities and the needs and objectives of the participating organizations and the participants and so on, and the extent to which it's going to be suitable to produce high quality outcomes and reinforce the capacities and international scope of the participating organization. So that's 30 points for the relevance of the project. 40 points for the quality of the project design and implementation. So the clarity, completeness, and quality of the different phases of the project proposal, consistency between what you say you want to achieve and what you're actually doing, the quality of the European development plan, the quality of the practical arrangements, the quality of the preparation that you provide to participants, the arrangements for the recognition and validation of the learning outcomes, the appropriateness of measures for selecting or involving participants, and so on. So those are what's contained within the second criteria. And the third criteria, and in this particular program there are only 3 criteria, the third and final criteria is the impact and dissemination. So again, this is a common criteria about what you are going to do in terms of making an impact or ensuring the maximum impact and disseminating the activities beyond the participants to create examples of good practice that are going to be potentially replicable across other parts of Europe. I realized I haven't stopped for a question, so I do apologize for that. I'm just going to go back quickly to see if anybody has come up with any questions or chat. Oh, nobody has. Right, either you've all fallen asleep or there are no questions as yet. Let's hope that you haven't fallen asleep. I'm just going to go back to the slides now. So, back to the slides. Funding available. Now, what you'll find is that this program, like Europe for Citizens and unlike Culture program, works on a sort of flat rate system, a lump sum payment system. So they will, provide amounts of money depending on numbers of people, how far they're traveling, sorts of number of activities you're doing, and so on and so forth. So again, it's much easier than a Culture program, for example, where you have to provide a detailed budget itemizing every aspect of your particular parts of your program. This is much more straightforward. So, for example, you'll see travel, they'll make a contribution to the travel costs from their place of origin to the venue of the activity and return. There'll be organizational support, which will cover implementation, preparation, monitoring, and so on and so forth for various activities. There will then individual support, so subsistence costs. There is tables which will tell you exactly how much you can get for various subsistence rates. If you're running particular courses that have got a cost associated with them, then you get a certain amount of euros per day. There's a maximum per participant in the particular mobility project. And if you're involving people with disabilities, then there can be some additional costs to help with any additional costs that the project might incur because of the participation of those individuals. So that's sort of funding that is available for the mobility projects. Mobility for youth and youth workers, youth exchanges, allowing groups of young people to meet and live together for up to 21 days. So there's a range of work programs and activities that can happen there. Allows young people to develop competencies and so on and so forth. I'm not going to read all that out, that's too tedious. Based on transnational cooperation, there's a list there of what's not eligible. So you can't apply to youth exchanges for academic study trips, profit-making organizations, tourism, festivals, holiday travel, and tours of performances. I'm afraid that is in there, so you can't apply for this particular youth exchanges to tour performances per se. You can also get funding for youth workers training and networking. So to support people who might be working with young people, you can get support for the training and networking of youth workers. This slide summarizes the role of the organizations, and again it's simply saying, well, there's going to be a coordinator, there's going to be sending organizations, there's going to be receiving organizations. So I think that's very straightforward. The other information about criteria and funding and deadlines is on. Criteria and funding is very similar to the adult education, which I've already been through, so I'm not going to go through all that again. You can check the program guide. It tells you on that slide what pages to look for in the program guide for more information about youth mobility. It's very, very similar. And there are 3 deadlines in 2015. There's one that's just gone, the 4th of February. The next deadline is the 30th of April, and then a deadline on the 1st of October as well. So there are 2 more deadlines in 2015 for youth mobility activities. This slide simply lists some examples of youth projects which have been supported in the past in the previous Youth in Action program in the cultural field. So you'll see that there's quite a variety of different culture-related projects that have been supported there. More interestingly, these are 2 projects which have been successful in the first round of the new program. These are 2 UK projects that have been successful. The Brouhaha International Organisation, which is a street arts festival in Liverpool. They got 127,000 euros with partners in France, Spain, Netherlands, Hungary, Morocco and Tunisia to develop this, what they're calling the Arts and Cultural Sector Employment Initiative. And I think this is I put this detail in because I thought it was a really good example of the sorts of project that they're interested in funding that does involve the cultural sector, but also ticks all the boxes they're looking for in terms of youth and the sort of challenges that they want to see addressed. The second program there is the Youth Theatre and Creative Arts project run by Opera Circus, who are based in the southwest, and they're a smaller scale project, 38,000 euro, with partners in the UK and in some of the Balkan countries. So those are 2 successes that have been in the cultural sector. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware that there are examples of success, that despite the fact that I've been quoting great chunks of the program guide, which doesn't seem to make much sense to the cultural sector, there are certainly ways in which cultural projects might be successful. And the other interesting point about these projects, certainly the first one, these are using mobility grants to undertake projects. So both of these have used, they've applied for a batch of mobility grants in order to undertake a project. So that's one of the reasons why I think that option is certainly worth exploring. Right, key action 2, strategic partnerships. Before I start on that, I'm just going to go back and check again on the questions. And no more questions, no chats have come through. So I assume that everybody is okay. So that's fine. We shall go back to the slides. Key action 2. So I'm going to talk briefly about strategic partnerships. What they're looking for is projects that are going to help implement innovative practices. So this is about innovation in these areas of education, training and young people. Positive and long-lasting effects, development, implementation and innovation. They keep saying outcomes, innovative approaches to addressing target groups, more dynamic, committed professional environment, and so on and so forth. You could read all these at your leisure. I'm just pointing out that innovation and different ways of teaching and learning and training and so on, and working with young people, this is what they're looking for here. Impact on participants, the sorts of things they're looking for, greater understanding to social, linguistic and cultural diversity, more active participation in society, for example. Those are some of the areas where it might be relevant for cultural organizations to become involved. The aims are to support the development, transfer and implementation of innovative practices. So again, we're talking about innovation. There are some examples here what they mean: enhancing the quality and relevance of the learning offer, provision assessment of key competences, increasing learning provision, promoting the take-up of innovative practices, and so on. So those are some examples. There are more on this page about cross-border cooperation, professional development, increasing capacities, fostering equality and inclusion, entrepreneurship education, the transition of learners through different levels and types of training, and so on. So fairly open in terms of what might be possible. Projects that address policy objectives, challenges, and needs of a specific field, or which cover several fields. That's just making the point that you might want to do a project which might cross over between vocational education and higher education, for example. That's what can be done with this particular strand. Over the lifetime of a project, there may be a broad range of activities. So activities which exchange good practice, which develop innovation, recognize and validate knowledge, skills, competences, cooperation between regional authorities, encouraging active citizenship and entrepreneurship, and so on and so forth. They organize training, teaching, or learning activities insofar as they bring added value in the achievement of the overall objectives. So if you just want to organize training, teaching, or learning activities of individuals, then you're probably best going for a batch of mobility grants rather than going for a project grant. Some examples that they give, so projects which give input to the process of validation of non-formal and informal learning. How are you going to help validate the sort of informal learning that's so important in today's education? Looking at different, exchanging ideas and experiences which are going to help validate different sorts of activities in other countries, ways in which you're going to be able to sort of use these experiences of working across borders to help address the way in which systems work within your own country and within the partner countries. They do talk about creativity and innovation, particularly in terms of spreading creative and innovative culture inside small businesses, partners from the creative sectors and HE institutions working with other partners to develop creative thinking, for example. And again, tailor-made action plans for creativity and innovation development. So engaging creative organizations in any sorts of areas where that's sort of the way in which creative organizations work can be brought to bear to help those organizations work better. This is a raft of examples from the previous program. The Leonardo program covered vocational education. The Grundtvig program was adult education and lifelong learning. And the Erasmus program was obviously higher education. Transversal was the part that covered different areas all in the one project. So there were just some examples there of the way in which cultural projects have been funded in the past. Participants, any type of organization, and it does specifically give examples of cultural organizations. They make the point that depending on the objective of the project, they're looking for the most appropriate and diverse range of partners and so on. They have to be established in the program countries. There may be some opportunities for involving partner countries, in other words, people outside the European Union as well. Eligible organizations, any public or private organization, and you'll see I picked out in red the fact that it does include cultural organizations, libraries, and museums again. Practical issues, any participating organization can apply. For the projects, you need at least 3 partners from 3 different countries. So for mobility, just 2. For projects, you need at least 3. There are some exceptions. So partnerships involving only schools or school authorities and youth. So if you're doing a youth partnership, you can get away with just 2. I would recommend that you always went for 3. The project in the partnerships in the youth field can last between 6 months and 2 years. Other types of partnerships, 2 to 3 years. You have to sort of choose your duration of the application point. That's fairly straightforward. You apply for the national agency, once again, within your own country. The deadlines for youth are the 3 deadlines you'll see in February, April, and October for youth projects, and 1 deadline for other types of partnership projects, 31st of March. So 31st of March this year is the next deadline for other partnership projects. The award criteria are summarized on this slide, the next few slides. Gaining experience in international cooperation and ways of working. The first award criteria, which is worth 30 points again, is the same one, relevance of the project. So again, relevance of the proposal to the objectives of European policies, the objectives and priorities of the action. That first thing about European policies, that's meant to drag us back to Europe 2020. That's the sort of thing which summarizes the overarching goals for the next 10 years, and your project should be related to that, as well as the objectives and priorities of the action you've chosen to apply under. Genuine adequate needs analysis, clearly defined realistic objectives which address the relevant issues, bringing synergies together between different fields of education, training and youth. That's what you're going to do. That could be very useful. The second award criteria is the quality of the project design and implementation. So this is all about same sorts of things as before: the work program, consistency, the quality of the methodology, the quality control you're going to implement, make sure it's cost effective, that everything's appropriate, and so on. And the third criteria is about the quality of the project team and the cooperation arrangements. So to make sure these are the right organizations working together, the way the project's been set up to sort of spread the tasks and the information around, participation of organizations from different fields, newcomers to the action. They're very keen to get new organizations involved as well. So this is also about project management, how you're going to make sure the project is going to work. And the final criteria is again common. You will have seen this before: impact and dissemination, how you're going to evaluate the outcomes, the potential impact, the quality of your dissemination plan, the degree to which you're going to be able to make sure the results get known to others, and so on and so forth. Funding rules. The expenses do vary because they could be very simple projects between small-scale organizations to very large-scale projects involving universities or large-scale consultancy groups or whatever it might be. And again, we are back at the menu of cost items. So we're back at the sort of lump sum type of financing, where you are choosing from a batch of potential cost items and calculating the actual cost based on certain quantities and other factors, rather than having to sort of create a complete budget from scratch. So you can get money for project management, contribution to the activities of the coordinating organisation, €500 per month. To the activities of the participating organisation, €250 per month, with a maximum of $2,750 per month, and so on. So, you can often demonstrate what you're going to sort of spend this money on, but there will then be a flat rate that you can get. You'll see the total amount you can get is up to €150,000 per year, so €12,500 per month. You can get money to participate in meetings between the project partners, so there's travel costs. You can get a maximum of €20,000 per year for these sorts of meetings. They must obviously have to be justified in terms of the actual project. There may be intellectual outputs, or hopefully there will be intellectual outputs, such as curricula, materials, training packages, open educational resources, IT tools, and so on and so forth. And there are different amounts you can get depending on the sorts of people who are involved in that: managers, researchers, teachers, technicians, administrative costs, and so on and so forth. All of this is set out on the various schedules within the program guide. Multiplier events: if you're going to run conferences, seminars, and other events which are designed to spread the word about this particular project or activities, then you can get additional money to run these sorts of events based on the cost per local participant and a per international participant. That's to encourage you to invite others, where you may be able to give them a little bit of an incentive to come towards their travel costs and their accommodation costs. There is other information available, and again, you can find all this in the program guide, where it provides all these tables about the amounts of money you can get, intellectual outputs, and subsistence costs, and so on and so forth. Right, my last time to go back to just check to see whether there are any questions that have come up. Right. Are there similar brownie points for partnerships that aren't just with your immediate neighbour countries? I'm not sure whether they spell it out in quite that way, but I think there is a general feeling these days that they would like you to spread your partnership if you possibly can. I mean, no one from the European Union is going to fund a partnership project that's only exchanging education and training between the UK and Ireland, for example, unless there was something that was really innovative and amazing that was going to come out of that. I think the fact that they bang on about innovation so much, I think it should be taken on board as reflecting the fact that that's a key criteria. If your project is genuinely and amazingly innovative, they might do that. Validation of non-formal learning equals formal validation in a broader sense. I think what they're looking for, Jana, here is ways in which you might have some innovative ways of validating non-formal learning. So if people are learning from participating in project visits, or if they're learning from other sorts of exchanges with other people. It's not, as opposed to sitting down and having an exam or having particular coursework marked or whatever. How are you able to validate that particular non-formal learning experience? What do you do to see whether that particular visit has been a useful, worthwhile experience? In what ways do you measure how it's contributed to the person's increase in their education, learning, understanding, skills, capacity, whatever it might be? I think that's what they're looking for in that particular area. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slides and finish this off. Right. Making a submission. We're back to the participant portal. There's common theme now. You must register in the participant portal. Check the fact that you can comply with the criteria. Check the financial conditions. Fill in the application form. Quite straightforward. Non-retroactivity, non-cumulative award, no profit, no co-financing. Sorry, no, not for profit. Sorry. The projects cannot make a profit, and there must be some co-financing involved. And I'll come to co-financing in a moment. The application form for the mobility grants is particularly straightforward because it can be applied to very small-scale projects. So it's designed for small-scale projects or small-scale mobility activities. So it's a remarkably straightforward application form. The project is slightly more complicated, but not impossibly so. The grant should always be seen as a portion of the eligible costs. Okay, they won't give you funding for the entire cost of the project, but they do not necessarily ask for the same level of detail of how you are funding the other costs that they are not funding. They do in the culture program, but they don't in Europe for Citizens, and they don't in quite the same way here in the Erasmus Plus program as well. There are particular provisions which you'll need to read in the program guide about eligible costs, the fact that you can't claim VAT unless you are unable to claim it back, and the fact that you can have this eligible indirect cost, so you can have this flat rate amount of 7% of the eligible direct costs, which is very similar to the system they operate for the culture program. You must indicate contribution sources other than the EU grant. Must take the form of the own resources, contribution from third parties, income generated by the project, whatever it might be, and you will have to sort of demonstrate all that. But there are no sort of 60-40, 50-50. There are no sort of rules along that basis. But you have to indicate in your application stage what will be your other sources of funding to make up the total budget, and you'll have to be able to demonstrate that you have met those. Otherwise, the Commission may reduce their final payment. Once again, you'll see the bottom point there, contributions in kind are not eligible for co-financing. I'm afraid they've gone right off the idea of contributions in kind. It's all done online, nothing to be sent by post or courier or fax or anything else. It's an electronic form with a few annexes. So again, unlike the culture program, it's easier. You don't have to print anything out, post it, send it on disk or anything like that. Okay. I don't think we need to worry about the multiple at this stage. If you're selected, you'll get a grant decision or a grant agreement. I'm fairly certain that you will get grant decisions because you are all in member states. No, you're not all in member states. If you're not in a member state, you may get a grant agreement. It's just a minor sort of thing. Grant agreements may be mono-beneficiary, where there is one beneficiary. They may be multi-beneficiaries because in some cases people put together consortia, and in those cases all the consortia get to sign. I don't think we need to worry too much about that. There will be a pre-financing along these sorts of bases. So for Key Action 1, mobility, there is a pre-financing of 80-20. For partnerships, 2 years, there's also single pre-financing of 80-20. For partnerships lasting 2 to 3 years, there are 2 pre-financing on the basis of 40-40-20. And then the final payment, you have to make that submit the final report within 60 days. So they will pay within 60 days of the receipt of your final report. There are all sorts of other issues to do with financial guarantees, subcontracting, and so on and so forth, all of which are virtually identical to what they say in every other program. So I think nearly everybody here has listened to one of my other webinars, so I'm not going to go through any of those. The point again at the very bottom there about open license intellectual property rights. They are pretty keen to ensure that, that you create these in a way in which they can be used and copied and distributed and disseminated freely across the European Union. So in summary, you can apply as mobility grants, project grants. Unlikely policy reform is going to be relevant, but that is the third strand. And you can apply under Sport and Jean Monnet. The list of national contact points can be found at that particular website. So for other countries, go to that website and you'll find the contact point. These contact points, because they are also grant providers, they are much better resourced than the other contact points, which are simply acting as information providers, such as the one for the culture program or the media program. So they should be able to give you a great deal more help than the contact points for some of these other programs. The UK contact point, that's their website, erasmusplus.org.uk. The UK contact point is a merger between the two agencies who were the contact points for the previous programs. So there is a consultancy in Birmingham called Ecorys, E-C-O-R-Y-S. They are one of the contact points for Erasmus Plus in the UK, and the other one is the British Council, who were the contact point for the Youth in Action program. So they've come together. That website is quite good. There are some very useful things there. So next steps, you've seen all about the next steps. Sign up for all the information, which Erasmus strand is right for you, how ready you are, which deadline. It's a shame the deadlines are coming up quite quickly, because if you miss the deadlines in March for projects, you won't have a chance to apply again until next year, unless it's youth. Do bear in mind that there are more deadlines for youth than there are for the education and training strands. The good idea and the right partners are still important. I have to say that in this case, I think the good idea is much more important than the partners. In the culture program, it's pretty essentially balanced between the good idea and the partners, because you need your partners to help you develop your good cultural project. But here, it seems to me that the good idea trumps the partners, and you may get some slightly, I was going to say dodgy partners, I don't mean that at all, but I mean partners who may not have put as much into the development of the project, but are still going to be worthwhile in terms of implementing your wonderful and innovative good idea. Those are all the services that we offer at Euclid, and that's the end of this particular webinar. I'm going to go back just now and look again to see if anybody has sent in any questions. Are the national agencies using international experts to evaluate proposals? No, they are not, as far as I am aware. They are simply using experts from their own country, because the applicants are from their own country, and although the projects will involve participation of others, my understanding is that the budgets would be horrendous. Actually, no, that's not true, because everything's done electronically these days. But I'm fairly certain, I will check that, given the fact that these days the evaluation process is done electronically. You don't actually bring the experts together anymore. You just send them all the application forms, and they look at them on, by email, or download them from the cloud, or whatever it might be. So I will check on that, but I'm fairly certain that there's no requirement on the national agencies to use international experts. But I may be wrong. I have to say I may be wrong. Are there any other questions? Thank you. Sounds so much easier than the culture program. Well, I have to say I think the mobility applications are a bit easier than the culture program. But I also say that the Europe for Citizens is even easier still. But there you go. Even though you have to apply to Brussels for Europe for Citizens, I think that's even more straightforward. But I think the mobility applications are remarkably straightforward, and a few organisations have been taking advantage of that, and I'm hoping that there will be a few more taking advantage in the future. Okay, thank you. People are saying thank you, so we must have reached the end. You've heard what I've had to say. Can I just say once again that if you want to send a chat message immediately, that's fine. I'll stay on for another moment or so, but otherwise you can email me with your questions or comments, and I will get back to you as quickly as I possibly can. So I'll hang on here, looking a bit silly, for the next little while, and then if anyone wants to contact me by email, then do feel free. And I may see some of you at the webinar, or see some of you who may see me at the webinar tomorrow, and I think one or two may be signed up for next week as well. I think increasing employability, Jana has asked a question about increasing employability. I think it is a very important criteria. I mean, one of the problems in European Union is the high unemployment, particularly amongst young people. I think any projects which provide innovative ways in which you're going to increase the employability of these young people is going to be a good one, a good thing. I mean, that Brouhaha project was about, a lot of it was about taking young people and giving them additional skills to increase their employability. That's what that project was all about. And they got 150,000 euros, whatever it might be. And I think cultural organizations are in a good position here because obviously the use of arts and culture and creativity to help people is well known, and there have been many reports in this particular area, and so it certainly is a way in which you can help young people gain potential skills, capacity building to make them more likely to get a start on the job ladder and so on. So I think it is quite important. Okay, I'll hang on a bit more just in case anybody else. It's now 2:05. Sorry about the glitch at the beginning as well. I apologize for that. There you go. Right, I think probably that's it. I think we've probably done the dash for today. So thank you very much. I'm going to log off now, and I'll see, or you will see me at the next webinar. Thank you very much. Farewell.